to the World Lens podcast. I am your host, Michelle Evans, and this week we are talking to another WTCI member, Brice Phillips. The last name might sound familiar if you spend any time in downtown Baltimore or if you're into seafood. Brice is the VP of Sustainability at Phillips Foods, the global seafood company, and also a former Bowie Fellow. Welcome to the show, Brice.
Thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I guess I'm going to have to whip out my EpiPen for this combo.
I hope not.
I am allergic to shellfish.
Oh, that's terrible. That is a curse.
It is a curse, especially living here. So, Brice, we're here to chat about Phillips and your commitment to sustainability. But first, I have to ask, is the crab cake recipe on the Phillips Seafood website really the old family recipe?
Oh, yeah, absolutely it is. That's my grandma Shirley's recipe.
Really?
She would never let anybody change it. She was one of the most amazing cooks you'd ever meet. She grew up really poor on the Eastern Shore, down in Fishing Creek in Dorchester County, right on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. And you just kind of had to make do with what was available locally.
Right.
She could make an oyster stew that is to die for. I remember one time when I was a kid, my father was in Asia, and she came up and made a couple gallons of oyster stew, put it in his freezer. And, of course, I got hungry while I was gone. I ate it all.
Oh, jeez.
And I've never seen my father more upset with me. But it's that. The oyster stew, the crab cake recipe, absolutely hers. It's the same recipe we serve at our restaurant. We have since 1956. If we change that, she'd probably crawl out of the ground and shake me silly. But, yeah, we're not shy about it.
Yeah.
We promote it. So if you buy our crab meat or our seafood spice in the grocery store, you'll see it plastered all over the side.
Yeah.
We want people to make a great crab cake, and we ask people to spend a lot of money on our product, and I don't want it to go to waste because they don't know what to do with it.
Give them the recipe and make sure it's worth their money.
Exactly.
So, now Phillips is a founding member of the National Fisheries Institute Crab Council, and you're actually the current chairman. Tell me a little about this council and why it was formed.
Okay, this is probably the best work I've ever done in my career. It's what I'm most proud about and most passionate about. We formed this about 15 years ago at the Boston Seafood Show, which is our big annual trade show there. Everybody comes, buyers, sellers, you name it. It's a global show. My father, Steve Phillips, he's our founder and our CEO. About 15 years ago, he was seeing a lot of signs of distress and overexploitation in the fisheries in Southeast Asia. One of the first signs that you'll see is generally the size of the animal that you're catching, specifically in a wild capture fishery. The average size will start getting smaller over time, and that's a really good sign that, look, you've already taken all the most mature animals out of the water. You're starting to dip into some of the immature animals, the ones that haven't had a chance to reproduce. So he called an informal meeting of all his competitors, and this is a show where we're fighting for sales with everybody. And he just stood up and said, "Gentlemen, we have a problem." I look for leadership examples out there in the marketplace. You always notice when CEOs are doing well and how they're growing their business, but there's also times when a leader really has to be honest sometimes about the darker side of our businesses, how we're affecting the environment, how we're affecting other people's lives in other parts of the world, and how the actions we take here today can have downstream effects far in the future. I look at that decision as really my father showing a great deal of integrity by organizing that gathering. It took a lot of guts to admit that we were part of a growing problem in our fisheries. And thankfully that show of leadership was well received, and we organized officially under the umbrella of our trade association, National Fisheries Institute. I'm the third chairman in 15 years, and it's been some of the most rewarding work I've done. And just working alongside competitors to drive positive changes in our fisheries it's been really challenging but rewarding beyond imagination.
Yeah. So this group is really about sustainability and encouraging the growth or continuation of crab populations. Is this because we have such a growing appetite for crab? Is it climate change hurting the population? What's the impetus for this?
So I would say on the growing appetite piece, yes, there's certainly some of that. However, we've seen a little bit of stabilization in the quantity of crab imported into the U.S. I won't say we've fully saturated the market, but we're awfully close to it. I mean, when we're looking now at like breakfast chains that do breakfast, we're looking at them as customers now. It means that we've kind of saturated the lunch and the dinner time day part.
Throw some crab in that omelet.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually been one of the biggest growing parts of our business. But as far as climate change is concerned, really the long-term effects remain to be seen with our crab species. We're really fortunate that our species, the females, produce so many eggs in their egg sponge, and they become sexually mature very, very early. So when you're fighting things like overexploitation of a fishery, if you have a species that takes, say, 10 years to reach sexual maturity and they only have 15 or 20 eggs, then reversing negative impacts takes a lot longer. But with blue swimming crab, it's actually, you can get a pretty quick rebound within a couple years. So we're actually quite lucky in that regard. Look, we've all heard about the snow crab fishery up in the North Pacific losing roughly 90% of its biomass, and that was absolutely due to some short-term warming trends that caused basically a starvation event in those crabs. Their metabolism increased so quickly because the water was so much warmer, and there was just simply not enough food. And they say up to 10 billion snow crab died.
Oh no!
And we're seeing a two-year shutdown of that fishery, which those coastal communities rely on those fisheries. So it's not only an economic thing that I have to protect for my own family business, but the socioeconomic destruction that goes downhill.
It trickles.
If we screw up, it's nothing short of an existential crisis for those folks. So we have to be very, very careful about that.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. And with climate change, I'm definitely worried about it. We're in the tropics, right? We're right near the equator in Indonesia and in India and Vietnam. I'm actually more concerned about climate change impact on the environment in which these crabs live. I think that could give us a situation in the future where it's a lot tougher for crabs to find places to spawn and to hide when they're babies.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about what the Crab Council is specifically doing here. Is it saying that you'll all adhere to specific methods when fishing and crabbing? You'll use specific types of nets, or that it promotes these guidelines?
So there's a few major things we do. You mentioned the gear types, right? So we actually have ministerial decrees at the national level with those governments in the areas in which we produce. It's not often that an industry goes to government and asks to be regulated, but that's exactly what we did very soon after that first meeting that my father had in Boston. So we asked the Indonesian government to impose a 10 centimeter catch size limit, very similar to the 5 and 5 1/4 inch limit that we have here in the Chesapeake Bay. You want to make sure that those crabs have had an adequate amount of time to reproduce and to replace themselves in the fishery. We also have asked for a ban and been granted the ban on any harvest of egg-bearing females.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, you want to keep those females in the water that have the egg sponge. If you take that female, you're going to get one crab.
And the rest will be...
If you leave that female in there, she releases her egg sponge, you can catch that female, and then you get whatever crabs grow to adulthood after that. So to me, that math is pretty simple. We've also banned the fishing method called bottom trawling.
What is that?
Which is basically a boat that drags a big metal sled behind it, and it just rips everything up. So if crabs are burrowed down into the sand, which they do sometimes, especially here in the Chesapeake Bay in the winter, but when you get those crabs out, you're also ripping out corals, you're ripping out subaquatic vegetation, you're ripping out all the environment in which these crabs spawn and then hide from predation. Another big thing that we do, we're really unique in the fact that we have a funding mechanism built into our entire council. So every quarter we report our imports. Not only of crab meat, we also make crab cakes overseas as well. I report that as well. And we pay 3 cents per pound imported back to this group. It gives us about $1 million budget every year. We only have about 16% administrative costs. It's really 2 consultants that help me with this project. There was the other $840,000 is prorated out to each of these countries. Each country has a processor association that we've organized, and they're responsible for taking that money and doing anything around sustainability. It could be a gear exchange program. If there's an area where they're using gear that is not very well targeted to crabs and is catching other things that really aren't targeted, you want to reduce that. So we'll go into some of those areas and we'll just give them new gear as long as they give us the old non-target gear. Right? And try to get some of that non-target gear out of the fishery. And we have fishery improvement programs. So I mentioned the in-country associations in each of these countries. They register their fishery improvement program on a website called fisheryprogress.org. And if you've never been on there, it is a treasure trove of information around sustainability.
Okay.
And so I would actually urge everyone to check that out if they want some more detail on what we're doing.
Nice. So it seems like you guys kind of have all these regulations in place. You're taking accountability for what you're doing so that you can try to fix it. I love that.
Yep.
So this may be a dumb question, but I know for other types of fish like seafood and thinking salmon, and you know how we have ways to farm them completely indoors. Is it something you can do with crabs?
I would say long term, it's certainly a possibility. I will never say no.
Okay.
Anything's possible. But simply put, crabs eat way too much and put on way too little body weight for what they eat. Look, they are scavengers.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're a scavenger, you're eating things down the bottom of the bay. If it can fit in your mouth, it's food.
Right.
Right? So they're eating a lot of decomposing fish, other dead mollusks and clams and what have you. A lot of bacteria that they're eating. And if they absorbed all that so quickly, the crabs themselves would likely become sick. So they have very inefficient metabolisms, I'll say. So they're just constantly cranking through food. When you're in a aquaculture environment, you have to feed the animals to raise them. Right? They're not in the wild, so they're not preying on what they would normally prey on. That's the number one cost in an aquaculture operation is the feed cost. And if you have a species like the blue crab or blue swimming crab that just eats a lot and doesn't put on a lot of body weight,
a lot of money.
The unit level economics start to become unworkable very quickly.
Yeah.
If you allow me to kind of wildly speculate a bit here,
Yeah.
there's a lot of technology in the medical space going on with bioengineering and genetic modification.
Right.
There's, I think, 12 different ways to bioengineer an organism. I could see a future down the road where we've find a way to bioengineer out some of the aggressiveness and cannibalistic nature that crabs have when they're all growing up in a very highly stocked environment like you would find in a fish farm. We could also find a way to help increase the metabolism of those crabs so that we could drive down the feed costs and reduce the cost to bring it to market. So at least to the point where it might be on parity with a wild caught product or even lower.
Interesting.
Yeah, and if you think about seafood's about half farm raised and half wild caught. We crossed that threshold in 2014 where the aquaculture exceeded it. If you look at your land-based animals, chicken, beef, pork, I mean, my father always says, when's the last time you saw a wild pig walking around or a wild chicken?
True.
Unless you go to Key West, you're not going to see many wild chickens going around.
I've seen a couple roaming through Baltimore before.
Yeah, you probably will.
Don't you?
Yeah, but right now at this time, they just the feed conversion ratio is the limiting factor.
I mean, that makes sense. It seems like that would be a very costly project.
Yeah.
So with all these different methods of promoting sustainability, there's a clear net good for the natural world. But what about somebody like my husband who buys crab meat at the store? Does all of this kind of end up changing anything?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So first and foremost, we believe that the, quote, business of sustainability is good business. If we don't protect our fisheries and we allow them to continually be overexploited, and this is true not just for crab, but for any type of wild capture fishery, you're going to end up a generation down the road and there's not going to be anything left.
Yeah.
Before the advent of really good data science, really good sensors for aquaculture systems, people were just doing guesswork on things like quotas, total allowable catch, shifting seasonality, shrinking seasons, expanding seasons. And it's led to a collapse of a lot of marine species around the globe, many of which that you eat today. The cod, the North Atlantic cod went through, a substantial decline to the point where it was almost fished out of existence.
Wow.
So we really have to protect that kind of stuff, and the data is there now to be able to do it. And just to make sure that we have that the fisheries remain robust and healthy. Any other gains that we make through these sustainable activities are really kind of icing on the cake. The main goal is to making sure that there's a good, highly reproductive, sustainable stock underwater. That is our goal. And if I'm successful doing that, it means that your husband buying crab at the grocery store, he's going to be paying a better price.
I'm sure he'd love
because
that.
if there's more supply, the fishermen can fish more. I can send more over here. It's at a lower cost. And crab, maybe steps down from the Ferrari sort of level of price down to the Mercedes or BMW level of price. And I don't think we'll ever get down to the Toyota level because it's too labor intensive to pick. Anyone from Maryland knows that.
Oh, yeah.
The crab in Asia and the crab here in the Chesapeake Bay, They're kind of like first cousins on the evolutionary scale, the scientific classification scale. Interior biology is the same way. So you could take a Marylander and drop them right into Indonesia or Vietnam, and they would have absolutely no problem picking that crab. All the biology is the same, even the intricate structures around the mouth, and the antenna and the eyes, even down to the little spines on the claws are all in the exact same place. It's just a different environment, different types of things. There's not a lot of coral reefs here in the Chesapeake Bay, but they're all over Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So they'll have longer appendages to fish underneath some of the hard corals to look for food. So just overall, we realize our product's really expensive. We have a lot of responsibility around that. When people buy my product, they're giving us a great deal of trust because they are parting with a lot of money. I do not take that lightly.
Yeah.
And we just believe that we have a responsibility to lead this effort in sustainability.
Yeah. Tangent really quick. It made me think about like the price of it. And I was in Utah recently in a grocery store, and they had it said a Maryland crab cake, but it was $2.
$2.
And it looked like a hockey puck.
Yeah.
It just did not look appetizing. Like, how is it that this store in Utah is selling this so-called Maryland crab cake for $2 when a crab cake is not $2?
Well, it could be if you're putting about 5% crab of the net weight in there. When I see those types of products at the grocery store, I really kind of scoff. I'm a little bit of a seafood elitist.
I'm sure.
I think that's pretty easy to believe.
Yeah.
I call them crabby hush puppies. That's what I call them, because that's really what they are. It's a bunch of dough, some mustard and mayonnaise, and crab may have been in the room when it was made. But if you see, 10 for $10 or something like that,
the
I think
essence of crab.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious what you're getting. Look, there's good manufacturers out there that can do a really nice job making affordable seafood. It seems that it would be easier to do that, to be good at that, than to be good at making great seafood.
Yeah.
But the opposite is actually true. When you make great seafood, you're starting with great product, right? That's easy to tell. You know when you've got great crab meat, and you also know pretty quickly when you got bad crab meat.
Right.
The ammonia smells, all that stuff you don't want to smell in seafood, right? The fishiness, all that kind of stuff. If you start with great product and mix in all natural ingredients that you can find in your grocery store, it's so much easier than saying, hey, let's find a way to design a crab cake that's 3 ounces that I can sell for 30 cents.
Yeah.
So that it can be $1 on the grocery store shelf after they make their money on it too. That's very difficult. People employ a lot of food science, a lot of chemicals, a lot of binders, shelf life extenders. You don't want that in your food. You really don't. Phillips has made a commitment about 5 years ago. We put together a clean label initiative. And to be honest, I just ripped off Panera Bread's program that they were doing at the time. They put
works.
a 2 foot by 2 foot sign at the beginning, the entrance of the store that said, in the future, all of our products, we're not going to have any artificial flavorings, colorings, sweeteners, or preservatives in our products. And I said, guys, that's a pretty easy program to follow. And so you go to a grocery store now, you take my box, you flip it around and look at the ingredient statement, and you'll find that that's true. There's a couple products that we haven't been able to fix yet, but moving forward, all new products are designed with that in mind.
Nice.
Health and wellness is a huge trend, especially amongst younger people. I want more young people eating seafood, because right now, with the prices where seafood is, it's largely food of the affluent.
Yeah.
And if we can find ways to get younger people to eat more seafood, they'll become healthier, they'll live better lives. And you got to get good seafood too, though.
Yeah. My kids are obsessed with seafood. My daughter, she eats mussels, she eats oysters, and loves crab and shrimp. So.
But you can't touch it.
I can't touch it. Oh, I know.
I feel bad for you. I really do. Like, it's a pain in my heart.
Oh, it's in mine too, because I know what it tastes like, and I still can't eat it. I wasn't always allergic. But I want to switch gears for a second and talk about the business side of things.
Yes.
Mainly that the Crab Council is made up of a lot of companies, like you said, that you compete with. How are you all getting together to push for sustainability, but you're actually competing for sales? How does that work?
So you landed on a really, really important thing here. I did not know this, or I did not expect this when I took over as chairman of this group in 2019. But the most critical thing that I did at the time was building camaraderie in the group, building trust, building a culture of excellence that everybody agreed on. look, working with direct competitors requires a ton of deliberate actions.
Yeah.
You have to be very honest and very direct in stating what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a lot of risks working with competitors. Anytime you start talking about customers, prices, markets, regions, you start wading into the antitrust world. And so one of the beautiful pieces about working and organizing under the National Fisheries Institute umbrella, we do not have meetings unless some of their staff is present.
Okay.
We have a laminated pink antitrust sheet that we read, even when we come back from bathroom breaks at these meetings.
Just a reminder.
It is the number one thing that we do is make sure we adhere to the antitrust statement.
What are some of the things in it?
It basically says that members' fees and prices are the most dangerous things to talk about.
Okay.
Now, when you build camaraderie with a group, you will eventually become friendly with your competitors.
Right.
And sometimes conversations may start to wade down that path.
Mm-hmm.
The beautiful thing is we have NFI staff there with us. The second that anything like that happens, the proverbial choke chain gets pulled,
Like,
and it's immediately stopped.
Okay.
Right? There's been prosecutions for antitrust in the seafood world.
Really?
Yes, and those groups did not have adequate protections like we have in place. So it's really important that I mention that.
Yeah.
We're there for sustainability and sustainability only. There's more than enough that we can all agree on to fill these meetings. We don't need to talk about price or anything like that.
Exactly.
Because we have mature markets over there. We're not vertically integrated. We don't own boats. We don't own landing zones. We don't own large-scale commercial fleets. Our crabs are caught by up to 40,000 artisanal Indonesian fishermen a day. Just in that country alone, 40,000 crabbers, working in like 12 to 13-foot boats made out of 2x6s.
Right.
And ornamented up and painted like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the boat culture over there is just incredible. So after building all that camaraderie, actually building consensus around the sustainability ideas was actually really easy. It's not hard to get competitors to agree on the right thing to do. I really knew that early on, but what I didn't know is that getting everyone to trust one another would be my biggest achievement in this group. And really crafting an environment where CEOs or director level folks felt safe to talk about some of the fishery shortcomings. That wasn't easy. And to be honest, it took a lot of me falling on the sword first.
Okay.
And then the others came around and said, wow, that's not that hard. Like we can talk about these things. And, I mentioned my father sort of starting that first meeting 15 years ago and being sort of the prime mover and saying, guys, we've got a problem. I really took that lesson to heart. And when I started this mission 6 years ago as the chairman, I did that. I said, guys, we got problems. I'm seeing this. I'm seeing that. Are you guys seeing it? And slowly they'll come around and admitting it. Yes. And now they're bringing things to these meetings. We meet 6 times or 6 days a year, fully with sustainability. 2 days here in Baltimore in the summer at our summer working group, 2 days in the fall in Miami. Miami's more about budgetary stuff.
Okay.
Then we meet at our big trade association show in January, the Global Seafood Market Conference, and then we meet in Boston again.
Okay.
So we're spending 6 days a year. And so the way I said is like, look, go beat each other up for 360 days a year. But 6 days, we're going to be each other's best friends. We're going to be working together towards sustainability. I really do feel like I've improved this group in driving consensus, not just among the largest producers, but amongst the smaller producers and associate members as well. A lot of times, smaller producers get left behind, and people don't listen to them because they just say, "Oh, they're smaller. They must not be as smart, or must not be as business savvy." And to be honest, some of our best ideas that we've had for these activities in Asia have come from the smaller producers.
Nice.
And some of the folks that aren't even producers at all, that just buy crab here, make crab cakes for grocery stores, and they like what we do, and they joined our effort, and they give money to us.
Nice.
I mean, they're my customers, and they're giving me money for sustainability. Imagine that.
Right.
The entire supply chain supporting it, right?
Exactly.
And so I love to put those people on a pedestal.
Right.
Folks like Three Fish down there in North Carolina, they do an amazing job contributing to their time, effort, and money to the council.
That's cool. So the Crab Council is sponsoring projects throughout Asia, but what about here at home? Baltimore is a crab town. Is the council or Phillips doing anything here?
Unfortunately, no, we're not. The majority of our business is in Southeast Asia now.
Okay.
We still do have a small crab facility in Dorchester County, and it's the one my great-granddad and my granddad started back in 1914.
Wow.
It'll always be there. Unfortunately, the Chesapeake Bay in the state of Maryland has its own set of challenges right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of invasive species problems.
Yes.
With the blue catfish.
The blue catfish.
I know, Governor Westmore has declared a state of emergency and has
Mm-hmm.
got some state funds to help support get rid of that stuff. It's great tasting fish. We've got it on our menu at our restaurant across the street.
A lot of people have it on there now.
Yeah, it's our fish and chips fish. It's great.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, the Maryland crab fishery has a lot of headwinds.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, first and foremost, being the availability of labor.
Right.
It's really, really difficult to find people. Now, a lot of people know about Maryland, and they know where Baltimore is and where Ocean City is.
Mm-hmm.
They know where Frederick and D.C. are.
Right.
No one really knows where Fishing Creek is.
No, I
And
don't
when
even
I
know where
say,
that is.
Go down to like you're going to Ocean City, turn right at the Walmart in Cambridge, and just pretty much keep going until the road stops. And so
Okay.
if you look up Fishing Creek on the map of Maryland, you'll understand why we have issues with labor.
Okay.
Right? All these seafood packing houses are right on the shores of the bay, and they're far away from population centers. And we've taken advantage of the H-2B visa
Mm-hmm.
worker program, but once it was changed to a lottery about 8 years ago, about 2/3 of the crabbing industry down there that needs labor does not get their visas every year.
Oh, wow.
And so these crab houses are shuttered.
Mm-hmm.
We've been shuttered 3 out of the last 4 years because we haven't had available labor.
Wow.
We've worked hard with the government, federal, local,
Mm-hmm.
to try to get some support to change some of these rules and get
Mhm.
maybe a seafood exemption
Right.
granted, because it's not just me, it's the scallop folks, it's
Right.
all the folks up in the Northeast, the folks up in Washington State, a lot of people in Alaska as well.
Mm.
We need additional labor, and in a very low unemployment environment like we're in right now,
Yeah.
it's even more difficult.
I bet.
It's even more difficult. So, sustainability in the Bay, I think that the Bay water quality is not great, but it's not getting worse. It's getting slightly better.
Yeah, it's improving a little.
There's been a lot of interesting development with the oyster industry,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of improvements in some bay grasses along the bay, which those two things are really the prime movers in getting the water quality better.
Okay.
But if we don't fix the labor issue, the industry here, even if the species and the fishery and the health of the crab resource is very strong, we won't have a fishery here.
Because there's no one to.
You have to have the labor. People have to be able to go out there and fish and then pick it
Yeah.
and package it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, what are you feeling positive about in your industry right now? There's so much doom and gloom around climate change and other things in the world.
I don't want to call myself an eternal optimist.
Okay.
And I would say you're right. If you just listen to classic media, it
Mhm.
is doom and gloom.
Always.
But if you step back and look at globally at sort of a 50,000-foot view,
Mm-hmm.
now, unfortunately, we have 2 terrible wars going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's generally less war than there's ever been. There's less abject poverty than there's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
There are better economic outcomes globally, pretty much everywhere, than there's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
There's less infant mortality than there's ever been.
Yeah.
The world is pretty much, by every measure, it gets better every decade. Right? So there actually is a lot to be proud of globally.
Mm-hmm.
If it bleeds, it leads, right? So the bad news always gets
Yeah.
always gets the airtime.
Of course.
But in my industry, what I see that makes me proud and makes me positive about the future is the people.
Okay.
It is when you go to these trade association shows and these conferences, you see the same people you've seen for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Seafood people are lifers. They are.
Mm.
They really are. Once we get our hooks into you, you generally aren't allowed to leave.
No pun intended.
Yeah, and no one wants to leave. I mean, everyone builds these amazing relationships because fisheries take a lot of co-working and co-management to make them run.
Okay.
And so we're not the only pre-competitive collaboration. There's a tuna council. There's a salmon council as well.
Hmm.
They're mainly driven towards marketing.
Okay.
We're mainly driven towards sustainability. look, different goals. It's fine, and they're successful at what they do. But the people move around. And if you're in the tuna fishery, you're gonna have some learnings if you have 15 years in that industry. Then you move into the fishing or into the crabbing industry. There's things that you can bring to me that makes sense, right? So I don't just speak to the crab folks. I speak to the finfish people, the other crustacean people, lobster, scallop, you name it. There's always lessons to be learned, and everyone in this industry is so willing and able to help each other out.
I love that.
Yeah, there's just an amazing brotherhood and sisterhood out there in the seafood industry that is that gives me a lot of pride, to be honest.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, Brice, if our listeners want to learn anything about the Crab Council or more about Phillips, where should they go?
So I mentioned one place earlier, which was fisheryprogress.org.
Right.
You will learn about every fishery globally if you want. If you want to learn about the scallop industry up in Canada, you can learn that. If you want to learn about the lobster industry up in Maine or Canada, you can do that there. I would really advise people to check that out.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of sort of consumer-facing apps that give you like a green, yellow, red, like best choice, good, and avoid, right?
Gotcha.
I would highly advise you throw all that stuff away. Throw it all away. Get down into the details. Find out what the fishery is doing. Find out how it's fished. Find out what they're doing for environmental, like rebuilding grassy areas. All that stuff is posted on there. Co-management. How do they handle their seasons? What NGOs do they work with? Do they have closed areas? Do they do gear exchange? Do they do ghost gear cleanup? You hear a lot about microplastics in our waterways now. There's some people that estimate the majority of the microplastics are a result of old, discarded, broken fishing gear that's still in the water. So part of our in-country association in Indonesia, they have a group that goes out and does nothing but send divers down, and they pull out old, discarded fishing gear. Because it will trap crabs that will die in there, because if it's not attached to a buoy, no one's going to be fishing it. Right. So you'll find out a lot of that information on Fishery Progress. We also have a website. It's committedtocrab.org.
Okay.
It's a pretty basic website. It'll show you who the council members are. There's some pretty decent information on there. I would like to see it updated a little bit more often, but I can't commit the resources to that.
Right.
It's that the money's better spent going towards sustainability activities.
Makes sense.
Than putting it towards a website. But yeah, I think between those two, you can get a pretty good amount of information. Or honestly, reach out directly to me.
Okay.
I love fielding calls from my customers. People call me all the time. They do, and I love taking those calls because, when you sort of get up to executive management, you can't help but sometimes lose touch with the employees that actually do all the work and then the customers that buy your product. I go into Costco and I do demos. I was down in Nashville and I was down in Sarasota at the beginning of this summer demoing our new lobster product.
Nice.
Pasteurized lobster. It was amazing. And hearing direct consumer feedback
That's gotta be
right
helpful.
after they taste something. There's no truer way to get a sense of whether what you're doing is going to be accepted or not than talking directly to people and giving them your food, funding it. You got to fund it.
Yeah.
It's outstanding. So I do love fielding those calls. It keeps me grounded. And look, if it's one thing when I have a customer service person that answers the call, but when my customer service team knows that it's okay to forward a call
to
one of the family owners of the company, to me, I don't get it. But to the caller, when they speak to either me or my father or my sister,
it's a big deal.
It hits differently. And sometimes they're willing to ask me things that they won't ask my customer service person. And so for me, it's just a way to stay grounded and stay attached to the people that eat my seafood.
I love that. Well, everybody, you hear that. Reach out to Brice. He is willing to talk to you.
Yeah.
Brice, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It was so great. If only I could eat a crab cake. Thank you all so much for listening. Please visit us online at WTCI.org and follow us on all social channels at WTC Institute. See you guys next time.